Chapter 35. Philip. It was so hard to believe. Even as I sat in the back of that truck with a bandana around my head and a machine gun across my lap, it still hadn't sunk in that I, Philip Horatio Horkman, a pet shop owner who wore corrective shoes well into my junior year of college, was on my way to Havana to help overthrow the Castro regime. I had never been in a war. I'm a member of the in-between generation that made me too young for Vietnam and then too old for any of the Gulf Wars, which my father, a decorated World War II veteran, could be counted on to throw up to me whenever the mood hit him. "Enlist, you coward!" he once shouted, apropos of nothing anyone was talking about at that particular moment. "Dad, Julius, we're in the middle of a Seder," I remember my mother saying after this outburst. "Your only son is reciting the 4 questions at a meal celebrating freedom from bondage, and you're shouting for him to serve in a war effort." "Why not?" he asked. "Because there's no war right now," Mom said. "And because I'm only 7 years old right now," I reminded him. But now, so many years later, I was in a war, and looked for answers before that first shot was even fired. "What do you suggest we do, El Horco?" asked Ramon. The rebels had taken to calling me El Horco, a nickname I was flattered by until I learned its translation meant the vomit. The truck was beginning to slow down, so it was so hard to believe. So it was just a matter of time, moments, until we began the mission of liberating Cuba from the grip of a ruling class whose greed became even more palpable when I saw their homes and neighborhoods on the outskirts of the city. Sprawling ostentation worthy of Beverly Hills zip codes, as compared to the squalor inhabited by Ramon and millions like him. "Secure the perimeter," I advised. It was a phrase I'd heard dozens of times in movies, and it seemed to work in those situations where soldiers wanted to contain the enemy, so I figured I'd give it a whirl. "Of the entire city?" he asked. "No reason not to," I answered with the nonchalance of someone who wasn't soiling himself. "With all due respect, El Horco, I do not believe that would be effective. As well armed as we are, there are but a few hundred of us, and in a city that covers 280 square miles, unless the enemy decided to run toward each of our soldiers, we'd be too far apart to be able to keep them within that perimeter." I felt stupid, and then Peckerman chimed in. "So why don't we just secure the radius?" I no longer felt stupid. "What are you saying?" asked Ramon. "Well, if I remember my high school geometry," explained Peckerman, "the radius extends from the edge of the circle to the middle, so if we all lined up that way, at least half the perimeter will be secure, which is better than nothing." "But the very concept of guerrilla warfare is for a small group of camouflage rebels to hide, ambush, and then quickly retreat," said Ramon. "It's based on the element of surprise, which, standing in the middle of a circle where the enemy can not only see us but also pick us off one at a time, as if we were ducks in a shooting gallery, completely compromises that strategy," added Nunez. "Oh," uttered Peckerman. At this point, no one anywhere had reason to feel stupid ever again. A few silent seconds later, we were in Havana, where every rebel soldier jumped out before the trucks even came to a complete stop. Because it was still morning, the city square known as Plaza Vieja was relatively empty of shoppers and tourists. This was good, as it was Ramon's wish that no innocent bystanders become casualties, as their beef was with the people inside the big buildings at the heart of the promenade. The objective was to stealthily go through the doors and seize control of the government without firing even a shot. Peckerman and I liked that part of the plan very, very much, the not getting shot part, but there were no guarantees. "Any suggestions, asshook?" Peckerman asked as we were at the front of the pack, heading up the stairs of what is called El Capitolio. Let the others pass us, I told him. No reason for you and me to be the first ones in that building. So we slowed down, and needless to say, that proved to be a wise decision, because as soon as the rebels opened those doors, they were greeted by fusillades coming from the guns of fully armed Cuban soldiers awaiting their arrival. Who tipped them off about this quote-unquote secret raid was a debate. Peckerman and I didn't wish to have at that very moment, as the steady gunfire coming from the inside of the government building was sending rebels flying backward to the point where the marble steps we just climbed were becoming littered with their bodies. So Ramon then ordered the rest of the troops to retreat, to not enter the building, so no more brave young men would sacrifice their lives for what had suddenly turned into a suicide mission. The rebels were outnumbered, outarmed, and betrayed, so Ramon felt their next move should be to recede back into safety at the perimeter and regroup. Now what, shit sniffer? Asked Peckerman. Run as fast as you can, I said. No reason to be the last ones to get away from this building. And because Peckerman and I now outran all the other rebels back toward the perimeter, we didn't realize it when we veered towards the left side of the esplanade that everyone else would be peeling off to the right, heading toward a small park at the far end of the promenade that was out of the line of fire. No big deal, I figured. When we stopped running and saw what had happened, we'd just circle around and meet up with everyone else. So we took a couple of steps in their direction when suddenly all the doorways filled with Cuban army soldiers emerging from the buildings, their weapons still drawn, looking out at the promenade for any more living rebels they could make an example of. They saw none, except for me and Peckerman. And while some of them dropped to a knee and took aim, the greater majority started running toward us, so we broke into a run, not in a straight line, but rather in an arc, to where Ramon and Nunez and the rest of the rebel army were still crouched hiding. Still in crouched hiding. But then the entire Cuban army started running in the direction we were heading. I never ran so fast. Not even as a soccer referee who no longer required corrective shoes. But still, I was used to the exertion, so my stamina, fueled by the torrents of adrenaline that were now coursing through my system, made it easier for me to sprint toward our comrades. As opposed to Peckerman, lumbering buffoon that he was, who looked as if he was going to have the incredibly rare life experience of actually seeing his heart burst through his chest, given the seismic breaths he was expelling. I reached the other side first. Though panting heavily, I rejoined the other rebels, so now I too was out of the sight of the Cuban army, who now started shooting at Peckerman, who was only about 20 feet away from us. What did I feel when I realized that he would probably not make it? Nothing. Under these circumstances, there was simply no time to indulge any emotions. What we needed was action. So, as if I'd shifted into a gear I didn't even know I had, I took a deep breath and yelled at the top of my lungs, "Secure the radius!" Whereupon all the rebels, including Ramon and Nunez, stood up, forming a line from the edge of the perimeter to the midpoint of the promenade, and started firing at the unsuspecting soldiers who were running right toward them. As an exhausted Peckerman collapsed onto the safe ground behind this cordon, the rebels unloaded everything they had, and when the shooting finally ceased, all the enemy soldiers were dead. "El Horco, Senor Peckerman," said a jubilant Ramon, who somehow figured that this was all done by design. "We would be honored to have you lead the way." So me and Peckerman moved up to the front of the pack, walked across the esplanade, up the marble stairs, entered El Capitolio, and took it over. Chapter 36, Jeffrey. I have been to some pretty wild parties. I was at a wedding once where at around the 3-hour mark in the reception, the best man went up to the band leader and requested Horse with No Name. And the band leader said he was sorry, but the band didn't have that particular tune in their repertoire. And the best man, a large individual, picked up the band leader by his tuxedo jacket and said, "It's 2 fucking chords." That was all the encouragement the band leader needed. The band started playing a half-assed version of A Horse with No Name. at which point the back door to the reception hall burst open, and the rest of the groomsmen came in, leading an actual horse. I still don't know where they got it. The reception hall was in Weehawken, New Jersey, which is not exactly the frontier, but wherever they found it, the horse was funny as hell, at least at first. After a while, the groomsmen got tired of holding it and went back to the bar. Which meant the horse is just wandering around unsupervised. He almost forgot it was there. You'd be going to take a leak and you'd see it grazing on the buffet lasagna and you'd go, oh yeah, the horse. Finally, the owner of the hall showed up, and as you can imagine, he was pissed. He wanted the horse out of there, and he wanted more money. And the father of the bride, a lawyer, was shouting that there was nothing in the sales contract that said you couldn't have a horse. Finally, the police came, and they were trying to grab the horse. But the groomsman lifted the groom onto its back, and the horse threw him off, breaking his collarbone. And the horse started freaking out. Barging around, knocking over tables, and the bride and her mom were screaming, and it basically turned into a riot. A bunch of people got arrested, and the father of the bride got tasered. That's when I left. I never did hear what happened to the horse. I do know the marriage lasted less than a year. My point is, I've seen some parties, but I never saw a party like the ones the Cubans put on the night we won the Battle of Havana. We wound up eating a victory meal in a huge marble floor room with potted palms around the sides and a big long table in the middle. Every guy at the table had a bottle of rum and a glass in front of him. Guys were getting up and giving speeches in Spanish, and at the end they'd hold up a glass and yell, "Secure the radius!" We'd all stand up and gulp down the rum, and then, here's where the party went to the next level. Guys would fire their weapons at the ceiling. Of course, the bullets ricocheted right back down, which you might think would put a damper on the shooting. But that's because you've never partied with Cuban revolutionaries who've just overthrown a regime. What they did as soon as they toasted the radius and squeezed off some rounds was dive under the table, which fortunately was a hardwood. I'm guessing walnut. We'd all be crouched under there laughing like maniacs with bullets hitting the table above us and the floor around us. It was probably still risky, but after the 7th or 8th glass of rum, nobody gave a shit. Speaking of which, I still had diarrhea. You'll see in a minute why this was important. I think it was from the quesadilla de harina de yuca rellena con camarones y queso crap. All I know was, all of a sudden, I needed to get to a toilet, so I stood up to leave the table. When the Cubans saw this, they thought I was about to make a speech, so they all stood up. So I waved my arms like, no, no, no. And they all waved their arms, no, no, no. So I pointed to my ass to indicate that I had a medical condition, and they thought this was hilarious. They all pointed to their asses, and then they all started yelling, yee, and then some idiot yelled, "Secure the radius!" I knew what was coming next, so I started running for the door. I got maybe 3 steps before somebody tackled me. And if you have been following this story, you know by now, there's only one asshole who would be asshole enough to be the asshole in question. "It's not safe out here," he's yelling. Like I didn't notice the bullets bouncing all around us. "I know that, fucknut," I informed him. "I have to get to a bathroom." And he goes, "Oh, dipshit." So he gets off me, and now we're both running toward the doors at the end of the hall. There were a few stray bullets still pinging around, and the Cubans were still under the table, so I don't think they'd noticed yet that we were missing. As I ran through the doorway, I thought I saw the potted plant palms on either side moving, but I was concentrating on getting to the toilet. Suddenly, wham! The door slammed shut behind us. I looked back and saw why the palms had been moving. The salamanders. 2 of them were wrapping a chain around the door handles to lock in the Cubans. The others grabbed Horkman and me, picked us up, and started running. I tried to explain that I needed a bathroom, but they weren't listening. They hustled us down some stairs and through some hallways, and then all of a sudden we were outside in an alley. There were 2 cars waiting there, old American ones. The salamanders threw us into the back seat of one, and we took off. It was nighttime. They drove on side streets with the lights off. "What's the meaning of this?" said Horkman, because that's the kind of asshole thing he says. The oldest salamander, the leader, looked back from the front seat. "The meaning of this is you fucked up." "What are you talking about?" said Horkman. "We won." "Exactly." Horkman looked at me. "I was right," he said. "Those guys wanted the rebels to lose." "I really need a toilet," I said. "What are you going to do with us?" said Horkman. "We're going to take you for a little ride," answered the leader, "on the dildo of doom." "The what?" "Technically," said the leader, "it's the DD-2038X, a very small, very fast, very advanced nuclear stealth submarine. Officially, it doesn't exist, so don't tell anybody, okay?" He smiled. "Not that you'll have anybody to tell where you're going." "I can't hold it much longer," I said. "Where are we going?" demanded Horkman. The leader smiled again. "Get Mom." "Is there a bathroom there?" I said. "Guantanamo," said Horkman. "You can't do that. We're American citizens." "What you are," said the leader, "is wanted international terrorists who are about to go missing, like Osama." The car stopped in a deserted waterfront area. It was very dark. They hustled us out and onto a rotting dock. The sub was tied there, low in the water, almost invisible. They opened a hatch and shoved us down a ladder into a cramped area with a little bench. They told us to sit on it and stay there. They cast off the lines and closed the hatch. The helmsman flipped switches and worked the controls. The sub started moving. "Is there a bathroom on this thing?" I said. "Just a minute," said the leader. "We're diving." "I don't have a minute," I said. I felt the sub going down, and then I felt something else. Something bad. "I'm sorry," I said. And then a volcano erupted in my bowels. Workman, sitting next to me, smelled it first. "Oh my God," he said. I couldn't answer. I was still erupting. I was the old faithful of feces, the space shuttle of shit. "Oh my God," said Horkman, looking at the floor. I don't even want to tell you what was happening on the floor, other than to say it was not a color usually found in nature. Almost immediately, an unbearable stench filled the sub. It was like being sealed in the business end of a porta potty at a chili cook-off in Phoenix in July. The salamanders were gagging. "Surface!" shouted the leader, his eyes watering. "Now!" "But sir," responded the helmsman, "we're still in the... Take it up right now." The helmsman yanked on levers. The sub shot up. The salamanders were already opening the hatch when we reached the surface. Some water splashed in as the salamanders scrambled up the ladder and out. Horkman was right behind them. I was right behind Horkman. I stuck my head out the hatch and sucked in a breath of air. We had popped up in Havana Harbor near some big ships, freighters. The salamanders were on the front end of the sub, lying down, retching and puking into the harbor. "Psst," said Horkman. He actually used that word. "Psst." He was crouching at the back of the sub, waving at me to go that way. "Come on," he whispered, and he slid off the deck into the water. I wasn't crazy about the idea, but I also wasn't crazy about staying with gung-ho maniacs on a diarrhea-filled submarine, even if it was my diarrhea. So as quietly as I could, I slid into the water after him. We swam toward the closest freighter, and spotted an opening almost at water level toward the back. We climbed up the ladder there and found ourselves inside what looked like the ship's garbage collection area, which smelled almost as bad as I did. We followed a corridor into the ship, found an empty cabin, and ducked inside. There were some hanging bunks, and we decided we'd spend the night there and figure out what to do when it was daylight. Horkman made me take off my pants and throw them out the porthole. We collapsed on the bunks. I fell asleep in maybe a minute. When I woke up, sunlight was coming through the porthole, and the ship was moving. Chapter 37, the NBC Nightly News. Brian Williams. Good evening. Our top story tonight again comes from Cuba, where the extraordinary events of the past 2 days have taken yet another astonishing twist. It now appears that the military masterminds behind the astonishing lightning strike revolution that overthrew the Cuban regime were, of all people, Philip Horkman and Jeffrey Peckerman, the New Jersey-based international terrorists, believed to be responsible for the recent attacks in New York City and the hijacking of the cruise ship Windsong, including the traumatic assault on Charo. For more on this remarkable development, we go to NBC correspondent Richard Hanft in Havana. Richard, what exactly is the connection between the rebel forces and these wanted terrorists? Hanft. It's not clear, Brian. The rebel leaders claim they had no prior contact with Horkman or Peckerman, yet somehow the two men were able to evade capture by the Cuban authorities, locate the secret rebel headquarters, take charge of the insurgent army, and lead the attack on Havana, achieving an astonishing victory by means of a highly unorthodox and innovative military tactic called the Radius. Williams. The Radius? Hanft. Correct, Brian. The rebels say their victory was totally the result of this innovative maneuver, led by these two apparently very charismatic men. And in yet another strange twist, Horkman and Peckerman apparently vanished only hours after the battle ended. 1 minute they were at a victory banquet here in Havana, and the next minute they were gone, disappearing in the words of the Cuban rebels, like fantasmas de la noche, or ghosts of the night. To add to the mystery, early today, the Cubans found a top-secret American spy submarine floating in Havana Harbor with a team of commandos clinging to the hull. Apparently, the submarine had been disabled by some kind of powerful biological weapon. Williams. Could this also be the work of Horkman and Peckerman? Hanft. The Cubans believe so, Brian. The American government has no official comment on the sub, but sources have told me the Pentagon is deeply embarrassed that Horkman and Peckerman were able to neutralize an elite commando unit apparently sent here to capture them. Williams. For more on the U.S. reaction, we go to NBC Washington correspondent Jeffrey Berkowitz. Jeffrey, what is the American government saying now? Berkowitz. Brian, officially Horkman and Peckerman are still wanted as terrorist enemies of the United States, but their role in the Cuban revolt has caused many here in Washington to reevaluate these shadowy figures. There is speculation that they may actually be some kind of super double agents, if you will, posing as terrorists, but actually using their international clout and their formidable abilities to advance a different agenda altogether. Williams. What agenda is that? Berkowitz. Nobody knows for sure, Brian, although some are now calling them freedom fighters. The singer Bono is strongly hinting that he has been in contact with them, as are Geraldo Rivera and the Nike Corporation. and in an indication that the public image of these fugitives may be changing here in Washington. We're already seeing young people wearing t-shirts like the one I'm holding here, with the words Fantasmas de la Noche above the faces of Horkman and Peckerman. Williams, that's Horkman and Peckerman? Berkowitz, I'm told these are their bar mitzvah photos. Williams, fascinating. And does anyone have any idea where these two are now? Berkowitz, apparently not, Brian. They have indeed vanished like ghosts in the night. They could be literally anywhere on Earth. But wherever they are, it's a good bet, based on their track record, that excitement is not far behind. Williams, excitement is definitely the word for these two. Chapter 38, Philip. Thank me, Horkman. Get off of me, you bloated mammal. Only if you thank me first. Not a chance in hell. Then I'm not budging. Ow! I was in great pain. I was on the floor. Peckerman's knee was in my back, and his grubby hands were under my chin, yanking my head upward in the general direction of Saturn, with the promise that he would not stop doing this until I said thank you. And there lay the problem. Call me arbitrary, but I truly felt I had to draw the line somewhere. Again, we were at sea. It was our first morning. After a surprisingly good night's sleep, my eyes opened to the disorientation of not recalling where I was, lying in what was, for all intents and purposes, a hammock hanging from the ceiling near the bowels of what were, for all intents and purposes, bowels. A corridor filled with waste being swept along by waves of tainted liquid toward a huge opening at the far end. It was about that time when I saw two rodents lying on their backs on top of a flattened Dixie cup as if in a water park, when I heard Peckerman approach from behind, demanding that I thank him for getting us where we were. Why in God's name should I thank you for that? Because otherwise we'd still be inside that submarine. So you're asking me to thank you for having diarrhea? Yes. No. And why not? First of all, it was involuntary. It's not like you had a brilliant strategy that you implemented and it affected our escape. You simply got sick at an opportune time. And secondly, from the looks of things, I said, well, I could have sworn that one of those floating rodents had fed the other one some grapes. I'd say, at best, this was a lateral move. That's when he knocked me to the floor and started hurting me. Funny thing, though, while Peckerman was snapping my head backward and forward like I was a giant Pez dispenser with colored candy issuing from my neck, it did cross my mind that we were indeed lucky to be away from those angry salamanders who were going to take us to Guantanamo, where, as presumed terrorists whose objective was to destroy America, we'd be thrown into dark cells and waterboarded. So, being here on this freighter, despite not knowing exactly where we were or where we were going, was a reprieve from what I was certain would be my fate. The country that I love hating me so much that when I died, either in prison or at the hands of a death squad that hunted me down, spontaneous parties would break out around the peace-loving world like they did when they finally found Osama bin Laden. So as much as it pained me to offer anything that even resembled positive feedback to this buffoon, I bit my lip and gave him what he so desperately needed. Thank you, Peckerman. You're very welcome, douchebag. Then the moron got up. And then I extended an arm the way football players do when they're seeking assistance getting up after they've been tackled. The way virtually every time, even the most barbaric players from the opposing teams help them up. So, as if I needed further confirmation that the Neanderthal I was traveling with was somewhere to the left of them on the evolutionary scale, I staggered to my feet unaided as he ignored my request and walked away whistling. I whistle a happy tune, still with no pants on. The freighter we were on is called a container ship, a long, flat transport that carries its cargo in rectangular truck-sized containers, stacked on top of each other by cargo cranes. This particular ship had about 75 of those huge containers filled with bananas from Ecuador, then stopped in Cuba where it picked up a smaller amount of sugar, and was now continuing on to a place that apparently needed bananas and a little sugar. They're probably green, huh? What's probably green, Peckerman? The bananas? Because if they're yellow, by the time they get to where they're going, they'll be overripe. Okay. And mushy. Uh-huh. In general, it was easy for me and Peckerman to anonymously blend in with the crew of 30 merchant marines after we stole work uniforms from the ship's laundry. And the fact that most of the men were from different countries made communicating in general a non-factor. These were veteran, tattooed seafarers who knew the jobs they had to perform and simply went about the routine. So the two of us merely did what they were doing. Whether it be swabbing, chipping paint, or operating forklifts, we insinuated ourselves into the group and worked alongside of everyone else. We also ate with them. And at night, after watching a movie in the ship's theater, or sitting in a corner of the game room pretending that we knew how to play chess, we went back to our room in those hanging bunks. But here's what I don't understand about bananas. Jesus, Peckerman, we're still talking about bananas. I mean, I've been to the supermarket, and a lot of times I've seen green bananas there. So? Well, if they're green by the time they get to the store, what color were they on the boat before they got to the store? Go to sleep, Peckerman. Maybe it's darker green. Peckerman, can't you find a shiny object that you can stare at for a while? With the exception of this idiocy, it was an easy routine to settle into, and all seemed to be under control until our third day out. Dinner. A bowl of unrecognizable sludge that everyone merely withstood, but Peckerman scarfed down like he was on death row. "Slow down," I said under my breath. "Peckerman, our fellow mariners affectionately call what you're shoveling into your pie hole SWAT, which in this instance stands for shit with a lot of thorns." "Fuck 'em, I'm hungry," Peckerman declared at the same unfortunate moment that a sneeze with the force of a tsunami sent a mouthful flying across the table and into the face of a Dutch seaman who was crying because he just found out his sister died. I knew Peckerman was in big trouble when everyone at the table fell silent in deference to their splattered comrade before the guy to Peckerman's right grabbed him from behind. And then I knew I was in big trouble when the guy to my left, parentheses, wrongly thinking Peckerman and I were friends, close parentheses, grabbed me from behind. They pulled us to our feet and dragged us to the center of the room, where the rest of the crew formed two lines to take turns punching us in the stomach. "Him first!" I heard Peckerman yell, at which point the guy in the front of that line clenched his fist and belted him with power that caused him to keep bowing at the waist like it was sundown at the Western Wall. And then it was my turn. I looked at the guy who was about to punch me. He was small, Asian, sort of pudgy. Sort of reminded me of what I would look like if I was small, Asian, and pudgy. What I mean is, he didn't seem like he was used to this kind of thing, but that he was aware that the other seamen from both lines were watching, and this scared me, because from the look on his face, I could tell he felt he had something to prove to them, especially when fueled by the cheering that was egging him on in at least 4 languages that I was able to discern. His look seemed to say he was sorry, but this was something he just had to do. So I closed my eyes and braced myself for the ensuing impact when I suddenly heard a word I never imagined I'd hear in my life. It came from an officer rushing into the mess hall and shouting in a voice that cut through the mounting chorus of the others, causing them all to stop cheering, to break ranks, and scatter in all directions. "Pirates!" Chapter 39, Jeffrey. It didn't register with me right away, the pirates thing. I was focused on the fact that my stomach hurt like a mother, and a whole crew of assholes were waiting their turn to punch me. I knew I had to think of something fast. This is going to sound weird, but my mind flashed back to Artie Burmett He was this bully in 8th grade who used to take my lunch money, give me wedgies, stuff like that. One day he roughed me up pretty good after school. When I got home, I was crying. My mom asked why. So I told her, and that night she told my dad. My dad was the kind of person who never backed down from a fight, even when the other person didn't want to fight, if you know what I mean. He got thrown out of a lot of bars in his day, and at least 2 funerals. One time he punched a cassowary. Google it. It's a giant flightless bird, bigger than an ostrich, with a weird head and huge Tyrannosaurus Rex feet. The way it happened was we were at this wildlife tourist attraction in Florida called Jungle Adventure, and we went to a bird show in an outdoor theater where, for the big climax, the guy chosen from the audience holds up a plum so a parrot can swoop down from the back of the theater and snatch it from his hand. At least that's what the announcer says is going to happen. What really happens is, while the guy is looking up at the parrot, a totally unexpected and fugly bird the size of Shaquille O'Neal comes barreling out from backstage and grabs the plum. Then what's supposed to happen is the victim, totally surprised, lets go of the plum, jumps back, maybe even screams a little. The audience has a big laugh, and the cassowary, swallowing the plum, trots off to his trainer. That's not what happened with my dad. He jerked the plum away and threw a left hook at the cassowary's noggin that connected pretty good. The cassowary totally freaked out. Things got hairy then. Workers trying to restrain this huge, pissed off bird. People running for the exits, a lot of screaming. When things finally calmed down, the trainer tore into my dad about how this was an extremely rare and valuable animal, and he could have killed it, and for that matter, he could have killed him. And what the hell was he thinking? My dad's position was, fuck you, and I'm keeping the plum. Now that you know what kind of guy my dad was, you probably know what he did when he found out about Artie Burmett. First, he smacked me in the head hard for crying like a girl. Then he said, next time that punk starts with you, you hit him hard, right in the nose. If I find out you chickened out, I'll beat the living shit out of you myself. So the next day, when Artie Burmett came to my locker and told me to give him my lunch money, I hit him hard, right in the nose. And you know what happened? I'll tell you what. Artie Burmett beat the living shit out of me and pissed in my locker. It's a lesson I never forgot. This flashed through my mind when the crew started hitting me in the stomach. Parentheses, I mean Artie Burmett flashed through my mind, not the cassowary. I included that here just for background. Close parentheses. I knew there was only one way I was going to get out of that ship alive, and that was to fall on the floor and cry like a girl. If you think I'm a coward, you can eat me. So I dropped down and curled up on the floor, eyes closed, whimpering, expecting to get yanked back to my feet or maybe kicked. Instead, I heard this commotion, and then Horkman shook me and said, "Get up! We're being attacked by pirates." I opened my eyes and said, "What the fuck do you want me to do about it?" He said, "We need to help repel the attack." Those are the actual words he used, repel the attack. I said, "Why? So these assholes can get back to punching us? It's better than getting keelhauled by pirates." They didn't answer that because I didn't want Horkman to know. I didn't know what keelhauled meant. Oh, it sounded enough like cornholed that I had a pretty good idea. When you think about it, a lot of pirates are probably gay. Look at Johnny Depp. We went up onto the deck where most of the crew were gathered along a side rail. We joined them and looked down into the ocean. Next to our ship were 2 speedboats carrying a dozen or so dark-skinned guys with guns. They were putting ladders against the side of our ship. Our crew didn't seem to be doing anything about this. In fact, our ship was no longer moving, which made it even easier for the pirates. It's like we had a big sign that said, "Welcome aboard." Horkman turned to the crewman next to him, a Dutch guy, and said, aren't we gonna repel them? Do what to them? Said the Dutch guy. I said, he means why don't we fight them? They have guns. Don't we have guns? Yes, a few, said the Dutchman. But if we shoot them, they shoot back at us and somebody gets hurt. He spat on the deck. Nobody wants to die for this piece of shit. The pirates were climbing over the rail. They waved their guns and yelled at us to line up, move inside, and sit on the floor. They left a couple of guards watching us, then went out. Pretty soon we felt the ship moving again. We had been sitting there for a couple of hours when 3 pirates came in, including one who I figured was the leader. He walked around the room looking at the crew. When he got to me and Horkman, he stopped and looked at us hard. He said something in a foreign language to his 2 lieutenants, and they all laughed. A chill went down my spine, or up my spine, whichever way is met. I whispered to Horkman, I bet these maggots are picking out somebody to keelhaul. He said, you're disgusting, you know that? I said, I'm disgusting. They're the ones looking to slam some ham. He said, what are you talking about? I didn't answer because the pirate leader was now standing right over us. I frowned, trying to look as unattractive as possible, but you never know with these perverts what turns them on. A lot of them like back hair, which unfortunately I have a lot of. Once for our anniversary, Donna gave me a gift certificate for laser hair removal, but I quit after 2 treatments, so all they cleared out was a patch of skin about the size of a business card, which Donna calls my mosquito landing zone. The pirate leader pointed at me and Horkman. You two, he said, stand up. We stood up. I kind of edged behind Horkman so they would pick him. I'd made my mind up what I was going to do if these savages tried to violate me. I was going to cry like a girl and beg for mercy. Allow me to introduce myself, the leader said. He spoke pretty good English for a savage. My name is Ali. You are Mr. Horkman and Mr. Peckerman, am I correct? Horkman and I gave each other a what the fuck look. Horkman said, how do you know who we are? Ali smiled. John Stewart. John Stewart, said Horkman. Yes, said Ali. You're regulars on The Daily Show. Not you in person, of course. Your photographs. John's been doing a very funny running bit about 2 Jewish men from New Jersey being wanted international terrorists on the run, having to eat freeze-dried Chinese food on Sunday night, and so on. You're also mentioned regularly on Letterman. And Jimmy Kimmel, said one of the lieutenants. We watch on satellite, said Ali. And of course, we're among your many Facebook followers. Facebook, said Horkman. You're huge, said Ali. Bigger than Snooky, said the other lieutenant. In any event, said Ali, it's a pleasure to meet you in person. It would be my honor to offer you more comfortable accommodations, as well as transport to your ultimate destination, which I gather is Beirut. Beirut, said Horkman. I assume so, since that's where the ship was bound. I said, so you're not going to keelhaul us? Ali laughed. Very funny, he said. Like we are Pirates of the Caribbean, huh? Parentheses, so it's true about Johnny Depp. Close parentheses. In all seriousness, continued Ali, despite our image in the Western media, we are modern businessmen. We detain the ship. The insurance company pays us, let us say, $20 million. We release the ship. The insurance company uses this as an excuse to increase its rates, thus making a tidy profit. The ship owners use that as an excuse to increase their rates. It's win-win-win. Horkman, solidifying his title of world's biggest asshole, said, but isn't it wrong? Ali looked at him for a few seconds and burst out laughing and said, you had me for a second there. They moved us up to the captain's quarters, which were decent, and gave us some food. Also, they had Cuban rum. We hung out there, mainly sitting around. Every now and then, Ali would stick his head in the door and shout, but isn't it wrong? Then he'd crack up. A few hours later, we were approaching the coast of Africa.